Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is kind of an exciting show. It's the last one of the year for us. And we thought that to sort of, round off the year, we would kind of do a little review, not just of the year, but of the last 100 years of tattooing. So we've got Chuck Eldridge from the Tattoo Archive. He's a well-established tattoo historian, possibly the most well-established tattoo historian in our industry. And we're going to talk a little bit about all the big changes that have happened over this past century. Then we've got Chris Longo coming on, and Chris is a personality that many of you who've been to conventions have no doubt seen and met and possibly had a drink with, had your picture taken with him.
He's the mayor.
He is the mayor of Tattooville. And then finally after that, we're going to have Bez on. Bez is a young tattooist from the UK, and he is doing a lot of really interesting things with modern ways of laying out and doing tattoos. He's invented a number of things. He's right there at the cutting edge. So he's going to talk a little bit about the future of tattooing. But first, I'd like you to welcome our guest, Chuck Eldridge from the Tattoo Archive.
Hi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for coming on. We're about to start 2014.
That's right.
How long have you actually had the archive established, and how long have you been involved in the tattoo profession?
Well, I started tattooing in the 70s, mid-70s, and the archive was formed in about 79.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, that's a lot of records.
So you also have a museum, don't you? A museum where people can come in?
Yes,
Where is it located?
It's in Winston-Salem, right?
Yeah, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, yes.
So, I guess it's been, 120-ish years since the electric tattoo machine, as we know it, has been around.
Like that. Yeah, it's been quite a while.
And, the profession has gone through incredible changes during this time. What would you say are some of the biggest changes? I mean, I know it's hard to list them.
Well, I think certainly with the advent of the electric machine, that was a big change. Of course, all tattooing before that was done by hand. And when the machine came along, I think it drew more people to the art and certainly probably speeded up the process somewhat. The tattoo machine came about during the Industrial Revolution, when everything was becoming electrified, sewing machines and lights and all the tasks that had been done by hand for centuries were all of a sudden being done with electric motors or electricity or some new gadget like that. So that obviously was a big change. I think some tattooers embraced it and some tattooers didn't embrace it. Some were dogmatic enough to offer hand and electric tattooing. So they were realistic and realized that some of the customers would probably be kind of taken aback by the electric machine. If you'd been getting tattooed for 2 or 3 decades by hand, and then all of a sudden this electric gadget kind of comes along, you might be a little bit skeptical of that.
So were there actually a lot of thriving tattoo shops doing hand tattooing before the machine arrived?
There was a lot. I mean, if it was done, it was done by hand. I mean, how many actual operating professional tattoo shops as we kind of know them today there were? That's a good question. I mean, it was certainly, the numbers were small in relation to what we see today. But certainly it was happening. And I think the ironic part, especially for North America, is that although the natives in North America had tattooed for centuries before the white man ever came, it was European immigrants that actually brought professional tattooing to North America. So I find that a little bit ironic. So you can see that this was already well established in Europe before it was so well established in the United States.
I always thought we were influenced by Japan.
The islanders that we copied first, right?
Well, that was one whole aspect of tattooing. What the explorers would go into the South Pacific, especially the South Pacific, and see this tattooing, and sometimes even bring back the tattooed natives. for display in Europe. And those natives were wined and dined by kings and queens. They had official portraits painted by them, and then they would be returned to the islands, often much to their detriment, because they would go back. They would go back with all these gifts, and of course, people would be jealous of that, and so that would create conflict. But the professional tattooing was established in New York City by European immigrants, Irish, German, such as this. So they really brought the art form as we know it today to this country and practiced it and got it established.
I think a lot of us, we have no problem imagining this sort of like turn of the century time when tattooing was changing, and then we can imagine these sort of 1940s and 50s sort of tattoo parlors. But what happened in that long period in between?
Things just kind of rolled along. You know what I'm saying? I think that traditionally tattooing has always boomed during war times. So anytime there were major wars going on, tattooing was in a big upswing. But I think what happened, is people basically went from back in those early tattooers were all, or at least a big majority of them were tattoo attractions that actually worked in the sideshow, in the circus, and the carnivals. And they would spend the season, if you will, from spring till fall, traveling with those shows. And then when wintertime would come, they would rent a small storefront downtown in one of the cities that they traveled through, maybe when they were on the road, and then they would set up their portable trunks and their window shade flash and operate there through the winter. And then when spring would come back around, they would be back on the road again. So the majority of the really famous early tattooers in America all started like this. So the shops were really kind of pretty haphazard. I mean, they were pretty minimal. There was a chair for the tattooer. There was a chair for the customer. There was a few sheets of flash on the wall. They had their tattoo trunks there. They had a spittoon in the corner, which was really important. But then when spring would come, those shops would just fold up and the people would be back on the road again. So it was a long time before tattooers could actually make a living sitting in one shop location doing tattoos, because the business was just small. And the tattooers, the circus carnival tattooers that did stop the travel with the circus and the carnivals and settle into towns, would normally settle into towns like Norfolk, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Charleston, where they had an incredible military business, so they could kind of rely on that, because that's basically who got tattooed in those times.
It's interesting how the tradition of the traveling tattooer goes back that far. I mean, still, to get well established in this business, it's different now. You're hitting conventions and doing guest spots, but it's still a big part of, getting your foot in the door and becoming a solid part of the industry.
Yeah, it's very true. It's that whole idea of the traveling tattooer is still very much alive and well. And, I'm not so sure how it's working these days, but I know just a decade ago or 15 years ago, there were tattooers that actually did not have shops. They spent their time on the road traveling and tattooing at conventions.
That's how I learned too. I didn't have a shop, so I can relate.
Yeah, and actually we know a number of people, well-established tattooers now. It's almost like it's happening again. I mean, we know people who are packing up their shops and, getting in an RV and going on the road for a year, except now they're going to other shops where they know the people. Because the community is much, much tighter and much bigger now. Right. There's a lot more destinations where you can travel to, and, someone might actually help line up work for you, or you can line it up on the internet, all these options that just weren't there back then.
Exactly. It's very true, but I love that whole idea of the traveling tattooer. I mean, that's more than just a romantic period in time. That's still happening. Yes.
Now let's fast forward a little bit to, the last 20, 30 years. These changes keep on happening. You've got a lot more women in the business. You've got a lot more different styles. I guess that would be one of the other big questions was, when did you start seeing women actually actively tattooing and really making a mark in the profession?
Well, I can remember really well the 70s conventions when Vivina Lazanga would show up with her sleeves. And everybody was blown away by that set of sleeves that she had. Everybody actually referred to them as, oh, she's got sleeves like guys would have, like men would have. You know what I'm saying? So that was a big change. And of course, she was working with Danny Danzel and Pete Stevens, and they're in Portland. Seattle, actually. And so, that was early. So that was like 70s, And, before that, the majority of, if there were women working in the tattoo business, usually they were tattooers' wives or girlfriends. But Vivine really signaled a kind of a change of thinking there. You know what I'm saying? She was an independent woman that had chose tattooing as an art form and career. And I think she inspired a whole generation or two of women tattooers.
Yeah. Yeah, she was one of the first ones that I noticed. Actually, when I first started getting tattooed in the mid '80s, she and Carrie Barba were the two that really stood out. And I mean, right. Carrie in particular, I was really blown away by, and she was one of the first people I actually traveled to get tattooed by. But gosh, they were so few and far between back then.
Yeah, well, even back into the '40s, there were women like Mildred Hall. There was Tex Peace's wife. There was Joe Darpell's wife. So there were women in the business, but there were few that were quite like Vivine. You know what I'm saying? That was kind of independent and kind of came to it on her own kind of volition, if you will, not somehow influenced by husband or boyfriend. Or it made a big difference, I think.
All right, we've got Chris Longo on the line. For anyone who's been to any convention in the last 20 years, you've probably met Chris.
You've at least seen him naked.
With his 3 bodysuits or whatever. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks for showing up for this.
Hi, Michele.
Hi.
And we've still got Chuck on the line. We've been kind of doing a quick review of the last century, and we had kind of gotten to the point where Vivine Lazanga had showed up on the scene. We were talking about
women tattooing and how it's kind of been a process.
Yes, it's been a process. Well,
and I think
Chris,
it still is sometimes, being a process. So I think that women are very highly underrated in this industry.
So what would you say in the 25 years or so that you've been actively going to conventions, some of the biggest things that you've seen change?
Well, some of the biggest things that I've seen change is it's just so huge now. I mean, compared to what it was when I first started going to conventions. I mean, when I started going to conventions, you maybe had 2 a year, and then it got to be like 4 a year, and now there's just so many, and there's just so much talent coming out. It's unbelievable. So, I mean, the whole industry, has exploded to where, in the last 25 years of doing shows, because I did the first Am up in Schenectady, I think was 85. But, just the way things are now compared to what they used to be, now I can't even keep up with all the amazing, talented artists that are coming out.
You remember that back in the day when somebody talented showed up, it would be a big event. Everyone would know about it. It was like, who is this Bernie Luther person or whatever? And now if you go to a convention, you'll see a half dozen or more new names you've never heard of before that are all really at the cutting edge. Chuck, I guess that would be a question for you, a good solid tattoo history question. When the conventions first started happening,
how did that change tattooing?
Well, in this country, the earliest one was about 56, or actually there was some that were around the turn of the century, but they were small social gatherings. And then in 56, there was Lescue's and a couple of his customers came over from England, and they had a big powwow get together in Sandusky, Ohio. Paul and Huck were there. So that was probably kind of the first kind of convention, if you will. But then, the convention scene that we kind of know today started in around 76. There were the clubs generally, were put on. At that period, it was at the very tail end of the whole kind of club cycle, if you would. In the 40s and 50s, there were lots of tattoo clubs all over the world. Every major country had at least one tattoo club, and these clubs were basically a way for tattoo fans and tattooers to kind of get together and exchange ideas and socialize and such as this. And they would have really kind of impromptu social gatherings. I mean, I think the Bristol Tattoo Club in the 50s and stuff was almost kind of a formula or a format that became popular, where they would meet at pubs. And all the guys would be standing around with their shirts off, and they'd be comparing their tattoos and talking about tattoos. And then this kind of grew and grew, and in the States, in '76, the Terry Wrigley and Dave Yerkew and people like that were early convention promoters. And like Chris was saying, in the '70s, the mid '70s, there was one convention a year, and once those dates were announced, everybody would mark that into their appointment book, their date book, and it would be, they would mark through that whole week, and everybody would show up for that. You know what I mean? And marvel that there were no fist fights going on the floor. It was almost like neutral ground. The conventions were.
Right. The clubs continued on as well, because I was going to New York City, the Tattoo Society meetings, when it was illegal in New York. For many years, like in the later 80s, early 90s, you had the Tattoo Society meetings in New York where you had all kinds of people that came. I mean, even celebrities like, I guess his name was Al Lewis from the Grandpa Munster used to come to the Tattoo Society meetings. They went on for years.
And Tattoo. Little Tattoo came to one of those, the actor.
Right, exactly.
Oh, right, yeah. I can remember those days. But that was really how the convention scene actually grew, was from those kind of informal social gatherings. And then it's kind of gotten completely out of hand, I think. When you've got 4 or 5 a weekend, it waters down the whole experience, I think. I think there's a bit of a problem with the convention scene at this point.
Absolutely.
Well, just because there's some that aren't run that well, and we've been to a few of those. Chris, what would you say is the biggest convention you've ever been to?
Well, probably the biggest were the Tattoo the Earth tours. I mean, there's just so many big ones now. I mean, and there's actually a lot of ones that are actually run well. But like Chuck was saying, I mean, it's totally out of hand with the amount. I mean, there's just so many, and there's really a lot of very good ones too that are put on really well. I mean, but I'd say as far as like the most organized and well run tattoo convention, I mean, it would have to be Hell City. I mean, that's my personal opinion, of course. I mean, as far as like well run, as far as being educational, where you have all different seminars, and it's just, to me, I mean, it's top of the list.
What has happened too with the convention is that the convention organizers want to make more money.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So they want to have more booths. So they begin to outgrow hotel convention centers where you've actually, your room, you've got the convention hall is carpeted with chandeliers. There's a nice restaurant right down the hallway. Your room's one short little elevator ride up. And now they end up putting us into convention centers that have concrete floors and shitty food. And as a vendor, I find that almost an insult. I think we deserve better than that, and those conventions should just not be supported, as far as I'm concerned, because the people that have gotten into promoting those conventions on that kind of scale have really lost the whole idea of creating something that's actually vendor friendly. the people that actually buy the booths and spend the 12 to 14 hours a day on the convention floor. Now, if you're paying your $25 and coming in for 2 or 3 hours, the concrete floor and the shitty food's no big deal. You can simply leave and go down the street to a nice restaurant and have something to eat. But if you're a vendor, then you're stuck there all day.
We were at a show once that had 240 booths, and the ones at the very back, they just simply didn't get visited. So that's about as vendor unfriendly as you can get.
Is that the one with the sausage that was smoking us out?
No, this was in Philly. But yeah, it was supremely unfriendly to the vendors, and I don't think that trying to stuff a hall with that many artists, you're not going to have the quality either. And that's like Chris was saying about Hell City. I mean, they actually screen portfolios before they will even allow somebody to work the show, because they want the overall standard to be high. And all the conventions should do that.
Yeah, I would think. And I really think that once the conventions got moved out of the hotel convention facilities, then that was the big mistake, as far as I'm concerned. As far as a person going there and working the convention, those convention center conventions are just no fun.
I'm curious to ask both of you who have been on the scene for a while in tattooing, what you think about where we're at right now as an industry with our art form, and where you see it going next. I mean, what do you think about where we're at right now with like all the new styles of tattooing coming in, and how many people are tattooists and how many people are getting tattooed? What's your thoughts on the present moment right now in tattooing?
Well, I think what's happened is it's gotten to the point tattooing has now that people graduating from art school can immediately come into tattooing and make a name for themselves and make a living without having to go through the whole gallery process like they used to as a painter. You know what I'm saying? And so I think a lot of young, talented artists coming out of art school are choosing tattooing as their medium. And I think in the long run, that's good for the business. I think elevating the technical aspect and the artistic aspect of the work can only be good for the business.
Yeah, I agree. Tattooing is now an attractive destination for an art school grad.
Exactly.
But for me, you know what? I feel like the way that everything has been going, truthfully, I mean, all it has really done, I mean, it's definitely out of hand on so many levels as far as with the conventions. I mean, let's face it, if any tattoo artist goes to a convention and they break even, they had a good show. All of that is totally out of control. But the work that we've seen in like the earlier 80s, 90s, I mean, back in the day, I mean, I thought that was it, you know what I mean? And it was like awesome. And now when I look back at that work compared to what is going on now, I think to myself, the unbelievable leaps and bounds that we have come. I mean, it's just, for me, you know what? I totally agree with Chuck as far as what all the conventions being like, look, it is an insult to all of the vendors, especially when you go to these big giant convention centers, and it is uncomfortable, okay? But the only reason why I still do go, because you know what? I still get that intense high when I meet these new, talented young artists that I've never heard of before. And then I look at some of this incredible artwork that is coming out, okay? For me, it makes it all worthwhile, because it just, that is my pure joy, to be able to meet these new, talented young artists that come out and the work that's being produced. I mean, like I said, I mean, it sums it all up as far as, when you're, thinking, what was so unbelievably talented like 30 years ago compared to some of the stuff that comes out now, it's just.
And it's still continuing.
Yeah, those conventions are definitely a lot more fun to go and visit than they are to work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
there's
no doubt about that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it has gotten way out of control. I mean, with the convention centers where you have 400 booths, it's like, how many, to me, still my favorite shows by far are where it's in a hotel where you can go down to the convention floor, and you're not walking across town to a convention center.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, another thing that I think is worth mentioning is, you know, one of the big things that I think I've seen in my 25 years is the educational aspect. The conventions started becoming a place where you could go and take seminars and classes from respected artists. And, you know, that was something that just wasn't possible, you know, before a certain point because of all the, I guess, fear between the artists because it was such a small and competitive business. I think it had to surpass a certain size as an industry to really make room for that.
That's true, but I think a lot of the convention organizers give a lot of lip service to the educational aspect as well. I know I end up going and have arranged to do a seminar on history, and then I get there, and it's in some little corner of the convention floor where they don't have a projector, they don't have a screen, they don't have any really facilities to where you could do some kind of lecture or seminar without a million distractions of the convention going on behind you. So there's some conventions that do really focus on that, but I think a lot of it's lip service.
It's definitely worth mentioning the Tattoo Now hosted events, the Paradise Tattoo Gathering in particular, which is pretty much focused around those kinds of activities.
I think the National Tattoo Association, too, should be mentioned in that. I mean, their 35th annual convention is coming in Southern California, and if you register for the convention, which you don't have to be a member to register for the convention and go, they have 3 days of seminars that are free.
Ah, all right. Well, hey, Chuck, we've got Bez on the line. Cool. Welcome, Bez. Thank you for waking up at 4 in the morning over there in England. Yeah, we've asked Bez to join us because, you know, discussion of tattooing past, present, and future. We wanted to bring in somebody who's really, you know, making a concerted effort to try integrating all these new technologies and ideas.
Kind of like a focus on where tattooing is going and is at the present moment with innovation. Mm-hmm. Technology.
And so far, we've been talking about the last 100 years, where the industry has changed, the convention scene, and when did you come into all this?
I've been tattooing about 8 years now, and just going back to what you guys were talking earlier on about the conventions, is in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in America, is I think the biggest change over this last 8 years for me, just being quite new to tattooing, is 8 years ago, there wasn't that many conventions. It seems to be the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a massive boom. And the whole social element is gone now, where I think people used to just wait till a convention came and actually travel to a convention, whereas now they don't. So you don't get that social bit where everybody went out and partied and met the artists and hung. And that's why I think a lot of these conventions now are not too much fun for artists or just for the customers, for the collectors.
Yeah, I think there's a whole kind of money-making thing that's kind of superseded the social aspect. I mean, but like I said, we were talking about those early conventions that were real social events. You know, there weren't even any tattooing that went on at them.
But they'll be the parties and the nights that you'll remember, but you don't remember them from the new conventions because they don't happen.
It's very true.
Yeah. And that's not just for us, that's for the collectors as well.
It took a little longer to hit over there, that's all. I mean, because it really has gotten, like, out of hand totally within the last 10 years here in the States, for sure.
How would you improve it? What do you think would be the next approach towards hosting some type of event?
I think
anyone.
Me personally, you know, what they're doing with the gathering is stuff like is making them smaller and not as often. Make them special.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the problem. A show does well. The promoter decides they need to do more shows. They need to size it up because that's just kind of the way everybody does things. And it's sometimes hard to say this is perfect, just how it is.
Yeah, it's the capitalist way, right?
Yep.
Well,
maybe some new spins on events need to happen.
Well, you know, I think a lot of it is who's putting the conventions on. You know, at one point it was always put on by, you know, a shop owner. And, you know, now we've kind of moved into these professional convention organizer run conventions, which are, you know, a completely different animal.
to the credit of the convention, it has elevated the awareness of people who, you know, might not get tattooed or might see it in a different light and bring it to the people all over. And I think it has helped the industry too. Yeah. I mean, it helped me. Just
certainly
part of it.
The press always shows up for that. So there's always a lot of press there, which is all kind of part of that educational thing for the public, if you will. But I think the smaller conventions to me are the ones that I enjoy more and I have better memories
Absolutely.
of. And the ones that are in nice, comfortable hotels. And, you know, there was a big deal, you know, in the 70s. I remember when the conventions kind of started in America. The clubs would go out of their way to find hotels, nice hotels, because they felt that that's what we deserved. If we were going to go and have a gathering of tattooers, we deserved to be in a nice facility with a nice hotel and a nice setting. We didn't deserve to be at the Cow Palace, you know, these kind of conventions. So I think that's gotten kind of lost.
The whole thing has just gotten so huge. I mean, that's why.
Well, there's been a lot of momentum being built up behind it, and I think everything we've talked about so far on this program has been illustrative of that. Like starting early on, the gatherings turning into larger conventions, turning into being on TV, all those things, and they all have pluses and minuses, but I also think they have a side to them that have been beneficial for tattooing. Like bringing it to people's attention on a more even level means that more people are going to get tattooed and more everyday people are going to get tattooed. It's not just going to be the rock stars and the fringe, you know? I mean, I just love the fact that so many different kinds of people get tattooed now and heavily tattooed.
And better tattoos.
So I feel like all that exposure has been really good for the industry.
So I wanted, since we've got Bez on the line, I wanted to talk about the actual like evolution of the art form itself. You know, I mean, for instance, you know, starting with the acetate stencils, and then we move on to hectograph stencils, and now Bez is doing layouts using computers, and of course I'm doing some of that too. But Bez, what do you think are some of the advantages of continuing to push this farther, and what are some of the other places you'd like to see it go in terms of new tools and things like that?
Well, I mean, to me, I think the technique of tattooing has got as far as it's going to go. Skin can only take so much. And I think that what we've got now is different ways of planning. And I think the planning of a tattoo now, to me, is just as important as the tattoo itself, with the actual process. I mean, from the other guys, obviously from the olden days, I think the idea of planning a tattoo was taking a picture off a wall and slapping it on somebody's arm. And now we've got artists, lots of artists, bringing art from different places and different genres into tattooing. And it's pushing tattooing. I think we've pushed the limit of the skin as far as it'll go, and now it's down to design. And that's getting crazy and bigger tattoos. I mean, you put Instagram on, and I'm blown away like every day by somebody doing something different. Although I'll have to admit, at the minute, it's getting hard because of Instagram and the internet. It's harder to see new stuff because as soon as you put something good on, or somebody puts something different on, it's copied.
Right.
And it's actually quite nice to see it develop into different styles.
Yeah, you can kind of, you know, when you post a piece, you're sort of, you know, contributing, you know, information into this overall thing, and you'll see it reflected back at you.
Yeah, I mean, I used to not put stuff up. Now I'll just put finished pieces up because, a bit like yourself, I mean, I was inspired by you and loads of other people were. But you put a piece up and you know somebody's going to take a bit of that and turn it into the next generation stuff. So, I mean, it's hard to keep up at the minute.
Yeah, it can be a little intimidating, but at the same time, you know, I want to be blown away. You know, when I see new work, I don't want it to be like, yeah, one of these days maybe they'll catch up with how awesome I am. But you know what I mean? I could be pretty insecure if I wanted to, you know, because there's a lot of people that can tattoo circles around me.
Well, we've talked a lot in previous shows about how it has to go through the you filter, and so nobody can be you. So if you just stay true to yourself and you just are true to your art and you do it from the heart and what you truly are passionate about, that will be your unique approach that no one else can be but you.
And really, that's the big revolution happening right now. Right now is in artistic style, because like you're saying, that how much farther can you go with technique? You know, it's just a matter at this point of the art itself.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it at the minute. Is now it's down to art. You know, it's what's in the tattooer's imagination now, whereas before it was what was on the wall. And just seeing how this last 3 or 4 years, I think, has been the biggest boom. Of just how different I look at the portfolio for what was the first Paradise Gathering, and to me was groundbreaking. It's come on so much since then, but I think it shows, like the Paradise Gathering, it's how easy our artists can get access to education. But I think for the world of tattooing, it's amazing, because it's just the possibilities are endless, as long as they remember skin, which you know, some of them don't, but you know, that's why I think at the minute, my biggest push is to I love seeing. I'll give people ideas. I did with the computer stuff, and seeing people run with it.
They all take it in different directions. So hey, I think it's time for us to start taking a few audience questions. Gabe, are you there?
Yep, I'm right here. So let's see, the chat rooms have been pretty busy. We've got people from Brazil, Texas, Kentucky, North Carolina, Iowa, Maryland, and Adrian Dominic is tuning in from Australia.
Hi. Hey, Adrian. How you doing?
What's he doing over there?
Yeah. We've got multiple compliments on Chuck's mustache, and there was at least one request to have stories told every night before going to bed. So, okay. Now, everybody was talking a bunch about conventions and supporting the right ones. The question is, how does an artist who's getting into conventions adequately research who's putting the shows on?
I think you probably have to go visit them. You probably have to go, because I think everybody's going to give you a different opinion of what the convention was like. So I would say probably start locally, and go visit them and see if they kind of fit in something that you think that you could work in, a framework that you could work in, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, actually hit the shows before committing to having a booth at them.
Yes.
And the buzz of the reputation is always available, I think, pretty easily with the internet.
Yeah.
You know, just people talk about whether they like it or not, and who goes to those shows and who you respect as an artist also indicates the quality of the show it will be.
Yep.
Yeah,
you can usually see at upcoming shows, you'll see a list of the artists who are committed to having booths, and that'll tell you a lot.
Exactly.
Yes.
I was just going to say that. I mean, research the shows, just like anything. When you educate yourself,
Right.
you can, make a much more well-educated choice of which shows to go to. Like any good tattoo convention, they'll have a list of the artists, and then you can go to their links and take a look at the artwork that these people produce.
And stay out of the convention centers.
Yes,
Yeah,
and,
I really agree with you. Yeah. It depersonalizes it, and what's the point when there's better shows to go to anyway?
How about this one? What is your stand on, in quotes, teaching unexperienced tattooers the things that you know? So not as an apprenticeship situation, but if there's another tattooer coming from another shop that's hanging around and starts to ask questions.
I help them. I'd rather give
agree.
people the knowledge, and instead of letting them see them destroy somebody's skin,
absolutely. Yes, you know what? In the long run, I have people coming into the shop all the time, asking me different things about getting apprenticeships and everything. And it's like, look, I try to educate them the best that I can, because here's the thing. I mean, they're going to do things anyway. So, the main thing is if you help them a little bit, maybe you might help the person that could be getting chewed up even worse by not helping them. So,
yeah, I mean my usual threshold for that is, if you're working in a professional shop, I'll share my whole palette of technical knowledge, because you should be situated in a place where you can do it right. People who are not yet in a shop, you just have to work really hard at encouraging them to approach the tattoo profession the right way, and to be the right kind of part of this industry. And and sometimes that means having to share information.
A lot of those people are there to get information and learn and be inspired. So it sort of goes with the territory too of the convention circuit and education in general and tattooing.
You just got to help point them in the right direction. Sometimes if they're not in a shop yet and you don't want to share that technical stuff, which I usually don't.
Right, there's a limit, I think.
But you can still go a long way towards encouraging them to build a portfolio the right way, to shop themselves around, to meet artists, to try to get involved in the industry the right way so that they can start learning.
And get tattooed.
Yeah, get tattooed.
Yeah,
Yes.
Tattooed and draw.
That's the best education. That is the best.
Visit the artists that you admire, get work from them, talk to them. That's going to take you a long way.
It's odd to me that there's any really well established tattooists out there that don't have tattoos. I just find that I'm still shocked by that. And then there's some good ones too. You have tattoos, don't you? Somewhere.
We went through
He's
this.
showing us the bald side.
But you have tattoos. I mean, it's weird to me that
Yeah, that's
tattoo
right.
artists can live tattooing without tattoos. I find that just crazy. I mean, because it's such a baptism of fire and believing in what you do when you're tattooed and you're a tattooist.
Yeah, when
It's
you have
huge.
to know what it's like to carry a piece on your body.
I think that's like the ultimate education.
And we've seen our share of really talented artists with no tattoos in the past,
Crazy.
for sure. Yep,
Commit.
absolutely.
Okay, so looking back over all the years, what were some of the biggest surprises? Some things that people weren't really expecting to happen?
That's a good question.
TV shows.
Chuck? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
TV shows.
Yeah.
And that they
Exactly.
weren't just a quick thing that happened once and went away. It's become
Yeah, it's still there.
a regular part of our culture.
I would never have expected that.
I mean, we live in small town America, and our next door neighbors were sitting and watching these shows with their, preteen kids, and that's normal. I mean, there's a whole generation of kids that have grown up in an environment where tattoos are a normal thing that you see on TV.
The only thing I don't care about the TV things is look, I do watch them because, like I say, if they could just educate just that little bit, but they started in the right direction a little bit, but they totally went off track. I mean, to actually have contests to tattoo somebody's eyelids, you know what I mean? Some of that is just to me sending out such a bad message to people. You're taking, tattoo artists that really are not experienced, to where they could do some really bad damage to somebody. I mean, just,
Whose fault is that? Do you think? Do you think that's the show organizer's fault, or is that the tattooers? Who's guilty?
They're all at fault. They're all at fault, because here's the thing: if the organizer said, "Look, we want you to tattoo somebody's eyelids," okay? Look, it's your responsibility too as a tattoo artist, okay? Just like it's my responsibility as a shop owner, okay? To where when I have a young kid comes into my shop that's 18 years old, that has no tattoos, and he doesn't have no idea what he wants for a living, he gets some big tattoo on his throat and he has no other tattoos. I mean, I won't do certain things, because anything in life, you have to have some morals.
Right, you have to standards.
Yeah. So I think we got time for one more question, and then we've got a few tattoos to look at.
Okay, well, this one's touching on the future, I suppose. Bez, what programs do you use to design the tattoos on the computer?
Mainly Photoshop, because most artists have access to it. And I use other packages like ZBrush and Maya. But I've tried to make stuff so it's accessible for everybody, just so it's easy. Because technology shouldn't get in the way of designs, which sometimes it does. So Photoshop, it's all you need.
I was really impressed in your Design Through Chaos DVD, how the things that you were laying on those virtual body parts, you're doing it so quickly, moving them around, resizing them, changing them in a way that, you could see how intuitive you could get with that. And so rather than this fancy computer model being a thing that slows you down and causes you to have to work harder, it actually empowers you to try things out more quickly.
Well, that was one of the reasons I did it, is because, I'm from a 3D background, 3D modeling, and I tried to find loads of different ways to create new tattoos, but they were taking far too long to you just don't have that time for a customer or just for ideas. So I wanted to create something that was spontaneous and anybody in a studio can use, and that was Photoshop, just the most basic of all.
I need to use program.
I keep telling Michele she has to see.
Because I do my designs in Photoshop too, and I simulate them, but I haven't seen your DVD yet, and I've been wanting to.
I think we do have time for one more question before we do our critiques.
Yeah.
This one's from Adrian. With the onset of digital art becoming a part of the tattoo reference developing, is drawing still a major part of the design development?
I think that if you can't draw, you can't do that other stuff. If you don't have a sense of composition, if you can't make a nicely flowing drawing from your own hand, all those tools are just going to get in your way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I use the computer for ideas, but I now draw my tattoos out. But if you can't draw the beginning, and Google's bad for tattooing. It's been good in a way, but it's also bad. We should draw.
Well, at the bottom line, you need to know how to make a nice looking image, and fundamental drawing skills teach you things like proportion and scale, and how many big objects versus how many small objects should be in a composition. I mean, that comes from spending a lot of time with your sketchbook in your lap and doing a lot of drawings that aren't for tattoos, that don't have to look great, just trying things out.
I would like to add, maybe to make a distinction here, when you draw, you're not just a replicator. It's your own artistic hand that is doing the tattoo, because you are interpreting it through your artistic hand that's trained. Whereas if you're looking at a reference and copying it, you're a duplicator. I mean, there's good duplicators out there, but there's not a creative hand in that if you're not changing it somehow and personalizing it with your own artistic touch, which comes from drawing skills and personalization in general, not just repeating what you see. That's an important distinction, don't you think?
And one other thing I wanted to say about doing your Google searches: don't pick something from the first page of results, because you'll see another tattoo that week on Instagram done from that same references.
But at least it's interesting to see how people twisted it a little.
Do it differently.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, we're gonna look at a few tattoos. We've got 4 different pieces queued up, and Chuck, I know you're not wanting to do any actual critiquing, but if you want to make any comments from the perspective of a guy that's seeing a lot of development in the industry, please chime in. And we tried to choose a selection of, and this is a variety of different kinds of styles here. So, Gabe, why don't you go ahead and put that first one up? That would be the fruit sleeve.
It's very graphic and kind of textile looking.
I think it's cool how there's, actually, I think there are parts of it that seem to have a little bit more nuance in the rendering, because it's extremely line oriented. This piece is practically a stained glass piece.
Yeah.
I just love the fact it's solid. Everything he does is solid, and happy. He does happy tattoos, which I think are cool tattoos.
I mean, I agree with that, because you know what? It's very simplistic, but it also is very symmetrical as well. I mean, the whole tattoo, the way both sleeves come together. I mean, it's not like it's super detailed, but I mean, I think, it's a very solid and clean tattoo as well.
It is very nicely balanced. I tend to back off a little bit from this much heavy lining. I really like being very selective with bold lines. I think they're actually a lot more effective when you have fewer of them, and they're really bold, and in those few places where you do that. And you'll see that in some of the older Japanese work before they started using electric machines. You'd see 3 distinct widths of line, including like a 1/4 inch one, a very fine one, and something in between. This has got a little bit of that, but for my own taste, I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more at the finer end of the lining scale.
It's bold.
It's bold. Yeah, it's bold to the extent of almost being stained glass.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of, stained glass.
And I think I also think this piece is going to look awesome in another 20 years down the line as well. So.
Yeah. This one's not going anywhere.
No.
Why don't we go ahead and bring up the second one? This would be this creature. I guess this is a A wolf. There's a different approach to a wolf.
It just to me looks very flat. I mean, placement. I think no, the placement isn't bad at all on the tattoo, but it's just that for me, I mean, it just sort of looks sort of flat, you know. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very, very basic rendering, and I think that's on purpose.
It seems to me like the wolf takes up a lot of space in a way that's not that visually interesting. You know, like if you were to imagine just wearing a half sleeve and just the bottom part sticking out, it's like the space that it occupies feels like it could have been, the flowers could have been bigger and more in the foreground and could have been more dynamic, even keeping it simple.
I think it's a nice layout, actually. I like the diagonal of the paw and the diagonal, movements around the bottom of the chin. I really think that the place where it could have been improved the most would have been in the rendering. And I understand that a lot of artists like to go with the single width of line and that kind of thing. I'm a big fan of multiple line weights. And especially with things like fur, I tend to do a lot of gray lining and that sort of thing. And, again, I know that artists that have a more traditional sort of approach, avoid that stuff deliberately. But a piece like this really could have a lot more depth and nuance to it with just a little bit of that. I also think that, and this is something I always try to point out, is imagine the piece with a short sleeve shirt on. So you're just seeing you're just seeing that part at the bottom, and that's how the piece is going to be seen, 60% of the time or something like that. And it is a little heavy down at the bottom. It might have been nice to see, more of a less of an even cutoff, more of a break off with some skin coming into the tattoo and some tattoo coming out into the surrounding skin. And I would have said that about the wrists on that previous pair of sleeves as well.
Yeah.
All right, the next one. This is really interesting. Very unusual use of skin. The upper arm, that would be the lips and nose.
Yeah, I like this one.
So do I. I actually like it a lot. I think that it's a great way to show, I mean, such, difference and contrast between your light and your dark, and just the way that the composition of it, I think is very interesting, and I like the placement of it, and I personally like this quite a bit.
Well, one of the things about it is you could look at this from an enormous distance, and it still reads. In fact, this is the kind of piece that, this is an across-the-street tattoo. And then when you get up closer, you've got, some nice nuance and that sort of thing. But it's a very, very simple, strong, high-contrast tattoo. It really couldn't stand having much done around it. You know what I mean? Like, the back of the arm pretty much has to stay blank now. It is sort of limiting to somebody who wants to get heavily tattooed. They really need to use some restraint, some real reserve in a case like this. Leave that blank skin around it.
Kind of like graphic and.
I think that the rendering in the mouth could have been better. Considering how simple and elemental this piece is. That and I could see this artist tried to bring some focus into the lips. They could have been a lot more realistic. I think that's really the one major weakness.
It's interesting. The tattoo is interesting.
Definitely an interesting,
Nice investment.
haven't seen this one before kind of tattoo. All right, we got one more. And Bez, this is one of the ones that you sent. Who's the name of this artist? It's the Bird in Hands.
It's Marcus Maguire from Scotland.
Okay.
And he has a very graphic look, which I think is a little bit different.
Yeah, illustrative.
Yes. He's
Very.
an artist I've helped bring on. And he just tattoos like he draws, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with how smooth it is. The lining, the shading, everything is really, really clean.
His line weight's good. I like that as well.
I also love the way that, the bird is like placed in between the neck just perfectly, and the hands. I mean, the symmetry with the hands, I mean, everything with this tattoo really, to me, stands out very, very well. I mean, just the way the contrast with the, your background, and especially, the way, like, it's got the halo around the bird's head coming into the throat. I mean, I like the way everything is presented in the tattoo.
Illustrative with kind of like a like Victorian woodcut narrative, you know, just has like a vintage look to it, right? A little
Yeah,
bit.
it definitely has a style
Yeah.
to it that's got some depth like that. And I like how this artist was willing to go with like the tattoo elements on the hands have some really nice value. It flows well, but it's also not too dark. It doesn't overpower the strong outlines around the hands. Yeah, everything's really nicely balanced. I think the neckline, with the way that the wings come up around the neckline, I don't know how that would look just sticking up out of the top of a collar. Probably pretty nice.
Yeah, I think it'd be fine. I think you could do a bit more bolder colour sometimes. It's sometimes almost a bit too.
Or, you know, like that, but saying, if you're going to do a piece that's this subdued, it's sometimes nice to choose just one color to go bright with.
Yeah.
And, you know, find a place where you could do that.
Could use some red.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so cool.
Bright red.
Bright red would be real cool.
I mean, all in all, it's technically a very nice tattoo. I mean, there's just a slight bit of disproportion, like with the hand.
Yeah,
The hands are deliberately a little exaggerated, you know, like they were not going for photoreal anatomy. And it does, in one way, look a little awkward in a couple of places. That was one of the things I noticed when I was looking at it from a distance. But I think overall the stylization of the piece is so nice that that more than makes up for that.
Which I think is the good thing about modern tattooing is now you're getting an artist. Now I can tell that's Marcus's tattoo because he's tattooing like he's drawn. And that's what I think.
Style.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a vast range of styles out there. It's just absolutely incredible. Well, does anybody have anything else that they'd like to say about tattooing past, present, and future before we
Let's
sign
hear
off
all
for
of
the
your
night?
closing comments on the show and what your thoughts are.
Let's just keep pushing that ink.
Yeah. It seems like as long as we just keep it up, this evolution is a thing that's happening naturally.
Exactly.
I think everyone on this panel is part of the evolution because of your contributions, either from a historical level, Chris Longo has just got an amazing personality and he's been on the scene for such a long time, judging and being who he is, and then Baz with his futuristic approach and his technology that he's bringing in. So everyone has a place. You know?
Well, every one of the thousands of us has a place in this. That's the thing is,
Absolutely.
you know, you could be in your first year of tattooing wondering what your style is even going to be, but you already are a significant part of this all.
I mean, and you can be any kind of style. It doesn't matter what style you do. Just do what you feel is right.
Be you.
Yeah.
Find your
But don't
you
forget
filter.
the history of tattooing. Like when Chuck Eldridge talks about where it came from, that made it possible for us to all be where we are now, and that's important to acknowledge, I think.
Yeah, so much has changed, but, you know, those important things, you know, a lot of them have stayed the same or are kind of a perpetual part of what makes tattooing what it is.
Yeah, I think we're standing on the shoulders of all those people that went before.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's important to at least consider that when you're seeing it blowing up, know that it took like the more primitive stages of where tattooing was from to go to the artsy, more, you know, experimental.
To be a place where an art school graduate would want to go.
My thoughts is that, you know, I think that we're going to keep evolving no matter what, as long as we try to continue to educate the mass, you know, and try to do what's right. I mean, I think that there's still more boundaries to be pushed, you know, and I think that the art is just going to continue on growing more. I mean, mainly because how acceptable it is now. I mean, I actually opened up a tattoo studio in the mall. I mean, and, you know, I try my best. Yeah, I try my best to educate people. I mean, the reality is it's here, okay? And no matter what, you know, I mean, it should be in the hands of people that are out there to try to educate and do good quality work. The future of all of the, you know, everything, like I said, you know, I mean, being in a mall, who would ever thought being in a mall, having, you know, a light up sign next to JCPenney and Bonton outside on the wall. I mean, nobody would ever thought that possible, you know, even 15 years ago. But, you know, the future is here.
You know, one thing I think is that there's just too many great tattoos walking around for tattooing to go away.
I like that. I think it's awesome.
Baz, any final closing comments for you?
Good.
I'm excited just to see what all these new artists are going to do. I think tattooing's in a good state apart from conventions. I'm excited, and I want to go to bed.
Okay, everyone, you have a great new year, and
Yeah, Happy New Year.
2014 is going to be amazing. And everyone, thank you for being here tonight.
And come back and join us again, please.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.